The gunshot cracked through the still morning air like thunder, and Rebecca Osborne's heart leaped into her throat as she ducked lower in the stagecoach. The Arizona Territory of 1878 wasn't turning out to be the promising fresh start she had imagined when she'd agreed to become someone's mail-order bride. "Get down, miss," the driver shouted from above, the stagecoach lurching as he whipped the horses into a desperate gallop. Rebecca pressed herself against the floor of the coach, her blue traveling dress soaking up the dust and grime as another volley of shots rang out. The other passenger, an elderly gentleman who had introduced himself as Mr. Collins, had already pressed himself into the opposite corner, his face ashen with fear. "Outlaws," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of hooves and creaking of wood. "Carlisle's gang. They've been terrorizing this route for months." Rebecca's fingers clutched the small locket around her neck, the last gift from her deceased mother. At 22, she had left everything behind in Boston. A life of drudgery as a seamstress, endless poverty, and the lingering shadow of her parents' deaths. The letter from Thomas Fletcher had seemed like divine providence, a cattle rancher outside Calico, California, seeking a bride, offering security and perhaps, in time, affection. Now, as bullets splintered the wood near her head, she wondered if she would live long enough to meet the man whose carefully penned letters had given her hope. "Stop the coach," a gruff voice demanded from outside. "Hand over your valuables and the woman." Rebecca's blood ran cold. The woman. They knew she was aboard. The stagecoach driver didn't comply. Instead, he urged the horses faster, the vehicle bouncing violently over the rugged terrain. Rebecca clung to the leather strap as they careened around a bend, the outlaws' horses' hoofbeats growing louder behind them. A particularly violent jolt sent Rebecca sliding across the floor. She grasped wildly for purchase as the stagecoach tilted, and then with a sickening lurch, the entire vehicle began to tip. Her scream mingled with Mr. Collins as the stagecoach rolled, throwing them against walls that became ceiling, then floor again. Pain exploded through Rebecca's shoulder as she was flung against the hard wooden frame. The world spun, glass shattered, and when the motion finally stopped, she found herself trapped in the overturned coach, dust filling her lungs. "Mr. Collins," she coughed, struggling to orient herself in the dimness. No answer came from the crumpled form across from her. Through the broken window above, sunlight streamed in along with the sound of approaching horses. Rebecca's heart pounded painfully against her ribs as she saw boots hit the ground outside. "Check for survivors," ordered the same gruff voice that had demanded they stop. With desperation fueling her movements, Rebecca pushed at the door above her, finding it jammed. The opposite door was beneath her, crushed against the ground. She was trapped like a bird in a cage, and the hunters were closing in. A face appeared at the broken window, a man with a scarred cheek and cold eyes beneath the brim of his hat. "Well, well," he drawled, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "Looks like we found what we came for, the mail-order bride herself." Rebecca recoiled. "How do you word travels, darlin'? Especially when Thomas Fletcher puts out word he's finally gettin' hitched. Mighty valuable, a woman promised to a wealthy rancher." He reached down through the window, his dirty fingers grasping at her sleeve. "Come on out now. We don't want to hurt you. Just need you for a little insurance." Rebecca struck out at his hand, her nails raking across his skin. He cursed, withdrawing momentarily, giving her precious seconds to search frantically for anything to use as a weapon. Her fingers closed around a broken piece of glass, and she clutched it tightly, ignoring the sting as it bit into her palm. "She's a feisty one, Carlisle," the man called to someone out of sight. "Might need some help here." The sound of more boots approached. Rebecca steeled herself, the glass shard trembling in her bloodied grip. If they wanted her, they would have to drag her out fighting. But before anyone else reached the window, gunshots erupted from somewhere in the distance. The outlaw's head snapped up, his focus diverted. "What the hell?" he began, but never finished his sentence as a bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him away from the window with a howl of pain. "Riders coming, armed!" Another voice shouted. "Grab the woman, now," ordered the one called Carlyle. A second man appeared at the window, more desperate now, reaching in with both arms. Rebecca slashed with her makeshift weapon, drawing a line of red across his forearm. He yelped but didn't retreat, managing to grab her wrist and twist until she dropped the glass with a cry of pain. "Got you now," he growled, trying to drag her upward through the broken window. Rebecca fought with all her strength, kicking and twisting, but she was being inexorably pulled upward when suddenly the man's eyes widened in shock. The grip on her wrist loosened as he slumped forward, half falling through the window, a dark stain spreading across his back. More gunfire erupted closer now. Rebecca could hear the thunder of hooves, shouted commands, the chaos of a skirmish. She pressed herself against the far side of the overturned coach, trembling, uncertain if her would-be rescuers were any safer than her attackers. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity, but was likely only minutes. Gradually, the gunfire tapered off, replaced by the sound of approaching footsteps measured, cautious. "Hello? Anyone alive in there?" called a deep voice different from the outlaw's, tinged with concern rather than menace. Rebecca hesitated, her throat dry with fear. "Yes," she finally managed. "I'm trapped. Stand back if you can, madam. We're going to get you out." There was a creaking sound, and then the jammed door was being forced open from the outside. Sunlight flooded in, momentarily blinding her. When her vision cleared, she found herself looking up into the face of a man silhouetted against the bright sky. He reached down, offering a strong, calloused hand. "Name's Kieran Farrell, madam. Seems you could use some help." Rebecca stared at the outstretched hand for a moment before placing her bloodied palm in his. With surprising gentleness, he helped her climb out of the wrecked stagecoach, steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle. "Thank you," she whispered, taking in her savior. Kieran Farrell stood tall, broad-shouldered in a dust-covered denim shirt and worn leather vest. His face was tanned by the sun, with striking blue eyes beneath the brim of his hat. A deputy's badge glinted on his chest. Behind him, several other men were securing the outlaws who had survived the gunfight. "You're hurt," he noted, looking at her bleeding hand and the bruises already forming on her exposed skin. "I'll survive," Rebecca assured him, though her voice wavered. She glanced back at the stagecoach. Mr. Collins, the other passenger. Kieran's expression sobered. "I'm sorry, madam. He didn't make it." Rebecca closed her eyes, a wave of grief washing over her for the kind old gentleman who had shared stories of his grandchildren during their journey. "The driver?" she asked, dreading the answer. "Alive, but injured. My men are tending to him." Kieran studied her face. "You're the mail-order bride heading to Calico to marry Thomas Fletcher," Rebecca nodded, suddenly self-conscious of her disheveled appearance. "Rebecca Osborne," she introduced herself, attempting to brush some of the dust from her once fine traveling dress. "How did you know to find me?" "We've been tracking Carlyle's gang for weeks," Kieran explained, guiding her toward his horse. "Got word they were planning something big. When we heard Fletcher's bride was coming in on today's stage." He shrugged. "Wasn't hard to figure they might make a move. Carlyle's been looking to hit Fletcher where it hurts for years." "Why would they target me specifically?" Rebecca asked, confusion mingling with the lingering fear. "Old feuds run deep out here," Kieran said, his expression darkening. "Fletcher's the most prosperous rancher in the county, and he testified against Carlisle's brother 3 years back. Got him hanged for murder." He glanced at the outlaws being tied up by his men. Carlisle swore revenge. Taking Fletcher's bride would have been quite the prize, either for ransom or worse. Rebecca shuddered, the reality of how close she'd come to such a fate sinking in. "You're safe now," Kieran assured her, seeming to sense her distress. "We'll get you to Calico and Fletcher's ranch." He offered his canteen. "Drink something first. It's a long ride ahead." As she sipped the lukewarm water, Rebecca observed the deputy directing his men. There was a quiet authority to him, a confidence without arrogance that commanded respect. His men, 4 in total, moved efficiently under his orders, securing prisoners, tending to the injured, and retrieving what they could from the wrecked stagecoach. "Your trunk survived," Kieran informed her, nodding toward where one of his men was loading her battered luggage onto a pack mule. "Not much else did, I'm afraid." "Thank you for salvaging what you could," Rebecca said, attempting to regain her composure. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she found herself acutely aware of her precarious situation. Here she was in a strange territory, dependent on the kindness of strangers, still bound for a marriage to a man she knew only through correspondence. Kieran seemed to read her thoughts. "First time out west?" he asked, his tone gentler. "Is it that obvious?" She managed a weak smile. "Most Easterners look a bit shell-shocked their first week," he said, a hint of amusement warming his eyes. "It'll pass. The West has a way of growing on you." "If I live long enough to acclimate," Rebecca responded, surprising herself with the wry comment. Kieran's laugh was unexpected, a rich, genuine sound. "You've got spirit, Miss Osborne. That'll serve you well out here." He glanced at the horizon where the sun was beginning its descent. "We should move out." "I don't like the idea of being caught in the open after dark, especially with Carlisle in custody. He's got more men who might come looking." A chill ran through Rebecca at his words. "There are more of them, unfortunately." Kieran whistled to his men. "Mount up, we ride for Calico." He turned back to Rebecca. "Can you ride, Miss Osborne?" "I." She hesitated. "I've had some lessons, but it's been years." "Then you'll ride with me," he decided, leading her to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that stood at least 17 hands high. "Storm and I will take good care of you." Before she could protest, Kieran lifted her easily onto the saddle, then swung up behind her. Rebecca stiffened, unaccustomed to such proximity with a man, but the alternative was attempting to ride alone across unfamiliar terrain. She forced herself to relax as Kieran reached around her to take the reins, creating a secure cage with his arms. "Comfortable?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. "As much as circumstances allow," she replied, striving for dignity despite her racing heart. With a signal to his men, Kieran urged Storm forward, and their small party began moving westward. The wrecked stagecoach grew smaller behind them, a stark reminder of how quickly life could change. 2 of Kieran's deputies led the surviving outlaws, including Carlisle himself, bound and mounted on their own horses. The 3rd deputy had the injured driver secured on his mount, while the 4th led the pack mule with Rebecca's belongings. As they rode, the sun began to set, painting the vast landscape in shades of orange and purple. Despite her exhaustion and the pain from her injuries, Rebecca couldn't help but be struck by the wild beauty surrounding them, so different from Boston's crowded streets and sooty buildings. "It's beautiful," she murmured, almost to herself. "Most beautiful place in the world," Kieran agreed, his voice holding genuine affection. "Harsh sometimes, but honest in its way. The land doesn't lie to you or put on airs. It is what it is." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse's movements becoming almost hypnotic. Rebecca found herself leaning back slightly against Kieran's solid chest, too tired to maintain perfect posture. If he noticed, he didn't comment. "Tell me about Thomas Fletcher," Kieran said eventually, breaking the comfortable silence. "What do you know of your intended?" Rebecca considered the question. "He wrote that he has a successful cattle ranch outside Calico. He's 36, never married. He seems—" She searched for the right word. Respectable. His letters were well composed, thoughtful. "And that was enough to bring you all this way?" There was no judgment in his tone, merely curiosity. "My parents died of influenza last year," Rebecca explained, surprised at how easily the words came when speaking to this virtual stranger. "I had been working as a seamstress, barely earning enough to keep a roof over my head, when Mr. Fletcher's advertisement appeared in the newspaper." She shrugged slightly. It offered security, a chance at a different life, perhaps not the romantic tale young girls dream of, but practical. Kieran was quiet for a moment. "Fletcher's a fair man," he finally said. "Keeps to himself mostly, runs his ranch well, treats his workers decent." "You know him?" Rebecca twisted slightly to look at Kieran's face. "Everyone knows everyone around these parts," he replied. "Calico's not Boston. We've had dealings over the years, mostly good, occasionally complicated. Territory law and private property interests don't always align neatly." Something in his tone made Rebecca wonder about the nature of those complications, but she didn't press. Instead, she asked, "What brought you to be a deputy in such a place, Mr. Farrell?" A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Just Kieran is fine. And that's a long story. Best saved for when we're not being pursued by potential outlaws and trying to reach town before full dark." As if to emphasize his point, he urged Storm into a faster trot, the rest of their party matching the pace. Rebecca turned her attention back to the trail ahead, aware that despite the relative safety of their group, danger still lurked in the gathering shadows of the western landscape. The sun had fully set by the time they crested a hill and saw lights twinkling in the distance. Relief flooded through Rebecca at this sign of civilization. "Calico," Kieran announced. "Not the biggest town, but it's home." As they drew closer, the shapes of buildings emerged from the darkness, a main street lined with establishments, some still illuminated despite the late hour. Music and laughter drifted from what was clearly a saloon. Rebecca observed men moving about on the boardwalks, a few women visible as well, though far fewer in number. "We'll take you to Doc Wilson first," Kieran decided. "Get those cuts looked at." "That's not necessary," Rebecca protested weakly. "I'm sure Mr. Fletcher is waiting." "Fletcher's ranch is still another hour's ride outside town," Kieran interrupted. "And I sent one of my men ahead with word of what happened. Fletcher knows you're safe and will meet us in town tomorrow. Tonight, you need rest and medical attention." Too exhausted to argue further, Rebecca nodded, allowing Kieran to guide his horse down the main street toward a modest building with a small sign indicating it was the doctor's office. Several townspeople called greetings to Kieran as they passed, curious eyes taking in the battered woman riding double with him, and the bound prisoners following behind. Kieran dismounted first, then reached up to help Rebecca down. Her legs nearly buckled when they touched solid ground, stiff from the long ride and weak from the day's ordeal. Kieran caught her elbow, steadying her with a firm but gentle grip. "Careful now," he murmured. The door to the doctor's office opened before they reached it, lights spilling onto the dusty street as a balding man with spectacles peered out. "Heard you were bringing in trouble," the man said, eyeing the group. "This the mail-order bride Carlyle was after." "Evening to you too, Doc," Kieran replied dryly. Miss Rebecca Osborne, meet Dr. Elijah Wilson, finest physician this side of San Francisco. You flatter me unnecessarily, Deputy. Dr. Wilson snorted, but his eyes were kind as they assessed Rebecca. Come in, Miss Osborne. Let's have a look at you. The doctor's office was small but immaculately clean, with the sharp smell of antiseptic hanging in the air. Dr. Wilson led Rebecca to an examination table while Kieran remained by the door. I'll see to the prisoners, he said. Get them secured for the night. Doc will take good care of you, Miss Osborne. Thank you, Rebecca called after him, suddenly reluctant to see him go. Kieran had become a fixed point of security in a day full of chaos. He paused, tipping his hat slightly. I'll check on you later, he promised, then was gone, closing the door behind him. Dr. Wilson worked efficiently, cleaning and bandaging the cut on Rebecca's palm, applying salve to her bruises and checking for any signs of more serious injury. His weathered hands were surprisingly gentle. You're fortunate, he pronounced when he'd finished. No broken bones, though you'll be sore for days. I'm recommending rest at least tonight and tomorrow. But Mr. Fletcher will understand, Dr. Wilson interrupted firmly. He's a reasonable man. More reasonable than some around here, he added cryptically. Before Rebecca could question his meaning, he continued, Mrs. Peterson runs the boarding house next door. She'll have a room for you tonight. Rebecca nodded, fatigue overwhelming her curiosity. The events of the day were catching up with her rapidly, and all she wanted was a quiet place to collect herself. Dr. Wilson must have noticed, for his expression softened. I'll walk you over myself, he offered, helping her down from the examination table. The boarding house was indeed just next door, a two-story white building with green shutters and a small, well-kept porch. Despite the late hour, Mrs. Peterson, a plump, silver-haired woman with shrewd eyes, received them warmly, clucking with sympathy when Dr. Wilson explained Rebecca's situation. Those dreadful Carlisle boys, she muttered, leading Rebecca upstairs to a small but clean room. Been nothing but trouble since they were knee-high to grasshoppers. Thank the Lord Kieran Farrell caught up to them in time. She bustled about, turning down the bed and lighting the bedside lamp. Your trunk arrived earlier. That young deputy dropped it off, and I've had a bath prepared. Thought you might want to wash off the trail dust. She gestured toward a copper tub screened off in the corner of the room, steam still rising from the water. Tears of gratitude welled in Rebecca's eyes at this unexpected kindness. Thank you, she whispered. You're very thoughtful. Nonsense, Mrs. Peterson waved away her thanks. Just neighborly. There's night clothes on the chair. There belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Sacramento. Should fit well enough for tonight. After Mrs. Peterson and Dr. Wilson departed, Rebecca sank gratefully into the bath, allowing the warm water to soothe her aching muscles and wash away the grime of the journey. As she scrubbed her skin clean, she tried to process everything that had happened. Just 24 hours ago, she had been full of nervous anticipation about meeting her future husband. Now, she found her thoughts occupied not by Thomas Fletcher, but by the deputy with the striking blue eyes who had risked his life to save her. Don't be foolish, she chided herself, rising from the cooling water and reaching for the towel. He was simply doing his job. Yet as she slipped into the borrowed nightgown and climbed into bed, she couldn't quite banish Kieran Farrell from her mind. Sleep claimed her almost instantly, but even in dreams, she was riding again, secure within the circle of his arms as they traversed the vast, untamed landscape. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the lace curtains of the boarding house window. Rebecca woke slowly, momentarily confused by her surroundings until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up cautiously, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Peterson's cheerful entry, bearing a tray of breakfast and a bundle of clothing. "Good morning, dear," the older woman greeted her. "Thought you might be hungry, and I've brought some things for you to wear. Your trunk took quite a beating in that stagecoach accident, I'm afraid." Most everything inside was crushed or torn. Rebecca accepted the tray gratefully. "You're very kind, Mrs. Peterson." "Just being neighborly," she repeated her sentiment from the night before. "The blue dress should fit you well enough. It's simple but clean and whole." She bustled about the room, drawing the curtains fully open. "Deputy Farrell stopped by early this morning to check on you. Said to tell you Mr. Fletcher will be arriving in town around noon." Rebecca felt an unexpected flutter at the mention of Kieran's name, followed by a surge of anxiety about meeting her intended husband at last. "Thank you for the message." Mrs. Peterson paused at the door. "Kieran also mentioned he'd be back himself mid-morning if you felt up to receiving visitors." Her eyes held a knowing gleam that made Rebecca blush. "That would be fine," she managed, focusing intently on her breakfast. After Mrs. Peterson departed, Rebecca ate quickly, then washed at the basin and dressed in the borrowed blue gingham dress. It fit reasonably well, though it was perhaps an inch too short, revealing her ankles. The style was simpler than she was accustomed to wearing in Boston, but practical for Western life. She pinned her chestnut hair into a modest arrangement, wishing for a mirror to check her appearance. Another knock sounded just as she was fastening the last hairpin. Her heart quickened, expecting Kieran, but when she opened the door, she found a young boy of about 12 standing there instead, cap in hand. "Mornin', madam," he said politely. "Deputy Farrell sent me to fetch you if you're feeling well enough. Said to tell you he's at the telegraph office and has news you should hear." Something in the boy's tone caused Rebecca's newly found sense of security to waver. "Is everything all right?" The boy shifted uncomfortably. "Don't rightly know, madam. Deputy just seemed concerned like." "I'll come right away," Rebecca decided, grabbing the shawl Mrs. Peterson had included with the dress. The boy led her down the main street to a small building with telegraph and post painted on its window. Inside, Kieran stood talking in low tones with another man. He looked up when she entered, his expression grave but warming slightly at the sight of her. "Miss Osborne," he greeted her, crossing to take her hand. "You're looking better this morning. How do you feel?" "Much improved, thank you," she replied, acutely aware of his hand holding hers perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Your message sounded urgent." Kieran's expression sobered. "I'm afraid we have a situation." He gestured to the other man. "This is Henry Wilcox, our telegraph operator. He received a concerning message this morning." Mr. Wilcox, a thin man with nervous hands, nodded. "From Silver Creek, madam. 15 miles east. Seems the rest of Carlisle's gang broke him and the others out during the night. Shot the sheriff there." Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. "They've escaped, all of them." "I'm afraid so," Kieran confirmed grimly. "And we've received word they're headed this way. Carlisle was quite vocal about finishing what he started before they took him away." "Me," Rebecca whispered, understanding immediately. "He's coming for me." "We believe so," Kieran said, not sugarcoating the situation. "Which means we need to move quickly. Fletcher's ranch would be the first place they'd look for you." "But Mr. Fletcher is on his way to town right now," Rebecca pointed out. "I've already sent riders to intercept him and warn him of the danger," Kieran assured her. "He'll be advised to stay at his ranch where his men can protect him." "And me?" Rebecca asked, working to keep her voice steady. "What happens to me?" Kieran's blue eyes met hers directly. "I'm taking you somewhere safe until Carlisle and his gang are recaptured. Somewhere they won't think to look." "Away from Calico?" Rebecca asked, trying to absorb this sudden change in plans. Yes, my family has a small cabin in the foothills, about 4 hours' ride from here. It's remote, defensible, and known to very few people. Rebecca took a deep breath, processing this information. Shouldn't I at least wait to meet Mr. Fletcher? He's traveled all this way, Miss Osborne, Kieran interrupted gently. Carlyle and his men could be here by nightfall. They're desperate, angry, and have nothing to lose. I can't risk your safety by waiting. The seriousness of his tone quelled any further objections. Very well, she agreed. When do we leave? Immediately. I've already had supplies packed. He hesitated, then added, I understand this isn't what you expected when you came west, and I'm sorry your introduction to our territory has been so fraught with danger. Despite everything, Rebecca managed a small smile. It seems the West is determined to test my mettle, Deputy Farrell. A hint of admiration flickered in his eyes. And you seem determined to rise to the challenge, Miss Osborne. Within the hour, they were riding out of Calico Kieran on Storm with Rebecca once again seated before him, and 2 deputies accompanying them as additional protection. Rebecca had barely had time to pen a hasty note to Thomas Fletcher, expressing her regrets at the change in plans and her hope that they would meet soon under better circumstances. Mrs. Peterson had promised to deliver it personally when Fletcher arrived. They rode hard throughout the morning, following trails that grew increasingly narrow and rugged as they left the relative flatlands around Calico and entered more mountainous terrain. The deputies rode ahead and behind, keeping watch for any signs of pursuit. By midday, they stopped briefly to rest the horses beside a small stream. Rebecca gratefully slid from the saddle, her legs trembling with fatigue. She walked stiffly to the water's edge, splashing her face with the cool liquid. You're holding up well, Kieran commented, coming to stand beside her. Many city folk would be complaining by now. Rebecca glanced up at him. Would complaining make the journey any easier? A smile tugged at his mouth. No, madam, it would not. Then there seems little point in it, she replied practically, though in truth, every muscle in her body ached from the unaccustomed riding. How much further to this cabin of yours? Another 2 hours if we maintain good pace. He offered her a piece of jerky from his pack. Not exactly the finest dining, but it'll keep your strength up. Rebecca accepted the tough strip of dried meat, finding it surprisingly palatable given her hunger. Tell me about this cabin, she requested, hoping conversation might distract her from her discomfort. You said it belongs to your family, Kieran nodded, settling beside her on a rock. My father built it 20 years ago when he first came west. Used to be our main home until he established our ranch closer to town. Your family has a ranch as well, Rebecca asked, surprised. I thought you were a full-time deputy. The Farrell Ranch is my brother's responsibility now, Kieran explained. I help when I can, but law enforcement is my primary duty. A shadow crossed his face. After what happened to my father, I felt compelled to wear the badge. Rebecca sensed there was more to the story. What happened to your father? Kieran was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. He was killed 5 years ago. Rustlers hit our ranch, stole half our herd. Pa and I tracked them into Apache territory. We got separated. He paused, the memory clearly painful. By the time I found him, it was too late. The local sheriff at the time didn't pursue it properly. Said it was too dangerous to go after the rustlers in Apache land. I'm so sorry, Rebecca said softly, understanding now his dedication to justice. I took the badge after Sheriff Collins retired, Kieran continued. Figured someone needed to stand for law even in the hard places. His expression lightened slightly. The cabin became a retreat for me, peaceful place to think, remember the good times with Pa. One of the deputies approached, interrupting their conversation. "No signs of pursuit yet, but we should keep moving, Kieran. Don't like being in the open too long." Kieran nodded, rising to his feet and offering Rebecca his hand. "Ready for the next leg of our journey, Miss Osborne." Rebecca accepted his assistance, noticing how easily he lifted her back onto Storm's saddle. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, settling herself for the ride ahead. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they climbed higher into the foothills. Pine and juniper trees provided welcome shade from the afternoon sun, the air growing cooler with the elevation. Rebecca found herself leaning back against Kieran more frequently, her fatigue making it difficult to maintain her posture. "You can rest if you need to," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "I won't let you fall." The simple promise held more comfort than it should have. Rebecca allowed herself to relax slightly, though sleep remained impossible while balanced on horseback. "Tell me about Boston," Kieran requested, seemingly intent on keeping her engaged and alert. "I've never been east of the Mississippi." Grateful for the distraction, Rebecca described her life in the crowded city, the narrow streets, the elegant shops along Washington Street that she could rarely afford to enter, the changing seasons with their distinct personalities. "I miss the autumn most of all," she admitted. "The trees in the common turning gold and crimson, the crispness in the air. We get good color in these mountains come fall," Kieran told her. "Different than eastern maples, but beautiful in its own way." He paused, then added, "Perhaps you'll still be here to see it." The comment hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Rebecca was acutely aware that by all rights, she should be married to Thomas Fletcher long before autumn arrived, living on his ranch, learning to be a rancher's wife. The thought no longer brought the sense of security she had anticipated when accepting his proposal. They rode in companionable silence for a while, until Kieran pointed ahead to a ridge partially obscured by tall pines. "Just beyond that rise. We're almost there." True to his word, they crested the ridge 20 minutes later to reveal a small clearing where a sturdy log cabin stood. It was modest but well built, with a stone chimney at one end and a small covered porch. A corral stood empty to one side, and a stream gurgled nearby. The entire setting radiated a peaceful isolation that made Rebecca understand why Kieran valued it as a retreat. "It's lovely," she said sincerely as they rode into the clearing. "It's not much," Kieran replied, "but it's solid and safe. Carlyle and his men won't find us here." The deputies helped establish a perimeter, checking the surrounding area while Kieran assisted Rebecca from the saddle and led her to the cabin. Inside, it was simple but clean, a main room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a rocking chair beside the hearth. A doorway led to what appeared to be a small bedroom. Basic but functional furnishings gave the place a homey feel despite its rustic nature. "My deputies will camp outside," Kieran explained, setting down the supplies they had brought. "Better for keeping watch. You can take the bedroom." "I'll sleep out here by the fire." Rebecca nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the strange circumstances that had brought her to this remote cabin with a man she barely knew. Just days ago, she had been traveling to meet her future husband. Now she was hiding from outlaws, dependent on Kieran Farrell for her very survival. "How long do you think we'll need to stay here?" she asked, sinking into the rocking chair as fatigue finally overtook her. Kieran knelt to kindle a fire in the hearth, his movements practiced and efficient. "Hard to say. My other deputies back in Calico will be organizing a search party for Carlyle. Once they capture him and his gang, it'll be safe for you to return." The fire caught, flames licking at the dry wood. "Could be days, might be longer." Rebecca watched him work, admiring the strength and sureness in his hands. "And Mr. Fletcher, What happens with our arrangement? Kieran's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly before he turned to face her. That remains between you and Fletcher, Miss Osborne. My only concern is keeping you alive so you have the chance to make that decision. The frankness of his response reminded Rebecca of the very real danger they were evading. Of course, she murmured. Forgive me. You've risked so much already to protect me, a complete stranger. Not such a stranger anymore, Kieran said, his expression softening as he rose to his full height. I'd say surviving a stagecoach attack, an outlaw pursuit, and a 4-hour ride together builds a certain acquaintance. A smile tugged at Rebecca's lips despite her exhaustion. I suppose it does at that, Deputy Farrell. Kieran, he reminded her gently. Out here, formality seems rather unnecessary, doesn't it? Kieran, she echoed, finding she liked the feel of his name on her lips. And you must call me Rebecca. One of the deputies appeared at the door, interrupting their exchange. Perimeter secure, Kieran. No signs of any trouble. We'll take shifts on watch through the night. Good man, Kieran nodded. Get some rest while you can. As the deputy withdrew, Kieran turned back to Rebecca. You should rest too. It's been a long couple of days for you. Rebecca couldn't argue with that assessment. Rising from the rocking chair required more effort than it should have, her muscles protesting every movement. Kieran stepped forward quickly, taking her elbow to steady her. Thank you, she murmured, acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of his hand through the fabric of her borrowed dress. You're welcome, he replied, his voice dropping to match her softer tone. For a moment, they stood close enough that Rebecca could see the darker flecks of indigo in his blue eyes, count the lines at their corners from squinting in the western sun. Kieran stepped back first, clearing his throat. I'll check on the horses, then see about some supper. The bedrooms through there not fancy, but the beds clean. Rebecca nodded, gathering her composure. Thank you, Kieran. Alone in the small bedroom, Rebecca sank onto the edge of the narrow bed, her mind whirling with conflicted emotions. The danger from Carlyle and his gang remained very real. Yet here in this secluded cabin, with Kieran nearby, she felt strangely secure. More troubling were her growing feelings for the deputy, feelings that had no place in her heart given her commitment to Thomas Fletcher. It's merely gratitude, she told herself firmly. Anyone would feel drawn to someone who saved their life. Yet as she stretched out on the surprisingly comfortable mattress, Rebecca couldn't quite convince herself that gratitude alone explained the flutter in her chest when Kieran said her name, or the way his smile warmed something long cold inside her. Sleep claimed her despite her troubled thoughts, and when she woke, the cabin was dark save for the glow of firelight seeping beneath the bedroom door. Rebecca rose, smoothing her rumpled dress as best she could, and ventured into the main room. Kieran sat at the rough-hewn table, cleaning his revolver by the light of an oil lamp. He looked up at her entrance, his features softened in the golden illumination. Feel better? He asked, setting aside the weapon. Much, she admitted, though her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, reminding her she hadn't eaten since their brief rest by the stream. Though apparently hungry, Kieran smiled, rising to retrieve a pot from the hearth. Got some stew simmering. Nothing fancy, rabbit my deputy trapped, and some beans, but it'll fill the hollow spots. The simple meal proved surprisingly satisfying, especially with the fresh bread one of the deputies had thought to bring from town. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the crackling fire and occasional hoot of an owl outside the only sounds. You think they'll find us? Rebecca asked finally, voicing the fear that had lingered despite her exhaustion. Kieran considered her question seriously. It's unlikely. Few people know about this place, and those who do are trustworthy. We covered our tracks well coming up here. He added another log to the fire. "But we'll remain vigilant all the same." Rebecca nodded, drawing comfort from his calm confidence. "Have you always lived in this territory?" "Since I was 10, Kieran replied. "My family came west after the war. Pa had been a Union soldier, came home to Tennessee to find our farm burned and not much left to rebuild with. Heard there was opportunity out west for those willing to work hard." A fond smile touched his lips. Ma wasn't thrilled about leaving civilization behind, but she followed him. Said someone had to make sure he didn't get himself killed by Indians or grizzly bears. "And did she succeed?" Rebecca asked, sensing the affection in his reminiscence. "For 20 years, Kieran's smile faded slightly. "She passed 2 winters before Pa was killed. Pneumonia took her." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said softly. "It seems we've both known loss." Kieran's gaze was warm with understanding. "It shapes us, doesn't it, the people we lose?" "Yes," Rebecca agreed, thinking of her own parents. "Though I prefer to think they also shape us by how they lived, not just by their absence." "A wise perspective," Kieran nodded. "My father used to say something similar. Remember me by how I lived, boy, not by how I died." He sounds like he was a good man. "The best I've known," Kieran confirmed. After a moment he asked, "What about your parents? What were they like?" Rebecca rarely spoke of her family, finding the memories still painful, but something about Kieran's genuine interest invited confidence. "My father was a schoolteacher," she began. "He loved books, poetry especially. Our home was never wealthy, but it was rich in words." A smile touched her lips at the memory. "Mother was more practical, a seamstress. She taught me to sew, said a woman should always have a skill to support herself if needed." "Wise advice," Kieran observed. "It served me well after they died," Rebecca acknowledged. "Though the work was harder to find than she had predicted. Boston has many seamstresses competing for limited positions." "Is that why you answered Fletcher's advertisement? The difficulty of supporting yourself?" Rebecca considered his question. "Partly," she admitted, "but also—" She hesitated, then continued, "Also loneliness, I suppose. With my parents gone, there was no one left who truly cared whether I thrived or merely survived another day." The vulnerability of her confession hung in the air between them. Kieran reached across the table, his hand covering hers in a gesture of understanding that required no words. They sat that way for a long moment, connected by shared experiences of loss and the simple human need for connection. When Kieran finally withdrew his hand, Rebecca felt its absence keenly. "We should get some rest," he suggested, his voice rougher than before. "Never know what tomorrow might bring." Rebecca nodded, rising from the table. "Good night, Kieran, and thank you for everything." His eyes held her steadily. "Good night, Rebecca." Later, lying in the darkness of the small bedroom, Rebecca listened to the night sounds of the cabin, the settling of logs, the occasional creak of floorboards as Kieran moved about the main room, the distant howl of a coyote in the mountains. Despite the strangeness of her circumstances, she felt an unexpected peace here in this remote place, as if the simplicity of survival had temporarily suspended the complications of her arranged marriage and uncertain future. She drifted to sleep with the memory of Kieran's hand covering hers, wondering if Thomas Fletcher would ever make her feel so understood with just a touch. The next 3 days established an unexpected rhythm to their secluded existence. Mornings began with Kieran and his deputies checking the perimeter and surrounding trails for any signs of intruders. Rebecca took charge of the cabin, finding comfort in domestic tasks, sweeping the rough plank floors, preparing simple meals from their provisions, washing clothes in the nearby stream. One of the deputies rode to the nearest town each day for news, returning by nightfall. So far, There had been no word of Carlisle's gang being captured, though rumors placed them searching the area around Fletcher's ranch, just as Kieran had predicted. On the fourth morning, Rebecca woke to the sound of voices outside the cabin, Kieran speaking with his men, their tones urgent but hushed. She dressed quickly and emerged to find them gathered around the remains of their campfire, expressions grim. "What's happened?" she asked, apprehension tightening her chest. Kieran turned to her, his face grave. "Jim just returned from Pine Hollow with news. Carlisle and his men attacked Fletcher's ranch yesterday. There was a firefight." Rebecca's hand flew to her throat. "Is Mr. Fletcher?" "He's alive," Kieran assured her quickly. "But 2 of his ranch hands were killed, and the main house was burned to the ground. Carlisle left a message saying he wouldn't stop until he found you." The weight of responsibility for those deaths settled heavily on Rebecca's shoulders. "Those poor men, because of me." "Not because of you," Kieran said firmly, crossing to her side. "Because of Carlisle's vendetta against Fletcher. You're just caught in the middle. What happens now?" Rebecca asked, fighting to maintain her composure. Kieran exchanged glances with his deputies before answering. "Fletcher has joined the search party looking for Carlisle. The territorial governor has authorized additional men from Fort Yuma to assist. They're closing in, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Rebecca pressed. "But there's evidence Carlisle may have figured out you're not in Calico anymore. They've started searching outlying areas." Fear coursed through her. "You think they'll find us here?" "It's still unlikely," Kieran reassured her. "But I don't believe in taking unnecessary risks. We should move you again, somewhere even more remote." Rebecca looked around at the cabin that had become a strange sort of sanctuary over the past few days. "Where would we go?" "There's an old mining claim deeper in these mountains," Kieran explained. "Abandoned years ago, but the shack is still sound. Few people know of its existence. We'd be safe there until Carlisle is caught." Rebecca nodded slowly, trusting his judgment. "When do we leave?" "As soon as possible." "Pack what you need. Traveling light is essential." Within an hour, they were mounted and moving deeper into the mountains, following game trails so narrow they often had to ride single file. Kieran led the way, Rebecca directly behind him on a gentle mare borrowed from one of the deputies, with the 2 lawmen bringing up the rear. The day grew warm as the sun climbed higher, the air fragrant with pine and sage. Under different circumstances, Rebecca might have found the rugged beauty of the landscape exhilarating. Now, every rustling branch or distant bird call made her tense with apprehension. They stopped briefly around midday to rest the horses, sharing a cold meal of jerky and hard biscuits. Kieran spent most of the break scanning their back trail with a small brass spyglass, his expression taut with concentration. "See anything?" Rebecca asked quietly when he finally lowered the instrument. "No," he replied, but his tone lacked conviction. "Which doesn't mean we're not being followed. Carlisle's an experienced tracker." As if summoned by his words, the distant crack of a rifle shot echoed through the mountains. Rebecca froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Down," Kieran commanded, moving with lightning speed to pull her behind the cover of a large boulder. The deputies likewise scrambled for protection, drawing their weapons. Another shot rang out, closer this time, splintering bark from a tree near where they had been standing. "They've found us," Rebecca whispered, fear making her voice tremble. Kieran's expression was grim as he checked his revolver. "Stay here. Don't move unless I tell you to." He signaled to his deputies, who nodded in silent understanding of whatever plan they had previously arranged. "You can't go out there," Rebecca protested, grabbing his arm. "They'll kill you." Kieran's blue eyes locked with hers. "I swore to protect you, Rebecca. That's exactly what I intend to do." He gently but firmly removed her hand from his arm. Jim and Bill will stay with you. If anything happens to me, they'll get you to safety." Before she could argue further, Kieran slipped away, moving from cover to cover with the practiced stealth of a man accustomed to navigating danger. Rebecca watched, heart in her throat, as he disappeared among the trees. For several long minutes, silence reigned. Then a flurry of gunshots erupted from somewhere to the west, followed by shouting. One of the deputies, Jim, the older of the two, moved closer to Rebecca. "Kieran's drawing them away from us," he explained in a low voice. "We need to move, miss. Head for that ridge over there." "But Kieran is buying us time," Jim interrupted firmly. "Don't waste it. He'd never forgive us if we let anything happen to you." Reluctantly, Rebecca allowed the deputies to guide her toward the ridge, moving as quickly as caution permitted through the underbrush. The sporadic sound of gunfire continued behind them, sometimes closer, sometimes more distant. They had nearly reached the crest of the ridge when a man stepped out from behind a large pine directly in their path, rifle aimed squarely at them. His weathered face bore a vicious scar across one cheek, and his eyes held cold triumph. "Well, well," he drawled. "If it ain't Fletcher's mail-order bride. Been looking for you, missy." Rebecca recognized him immediately from the stagecoach attack Carlyle himself. The deputies reached for their weapons, but Carlyle's finger tightened on the trigger. "Wouldn't if I was you boys," he warned. "My men have you surrounded." As if to confirm his claim, two more armed men emerged from the trees on either side of them. Rebecca's blood ran cold as she realized the extent of the trap they had walked into. "Where's Farrell?" Carlyle demanded, his rifle unwavering. "The righteous deputy himself." "Right here, Carlyle." The voice came from behind them. Rebecca turned to see Kieran standing 20 feet away, his revolver aimed directly at Carlyle's head. His shirt was torn and bloodied at the shoulder, but his stance was steady, his expression coldly determined. "Drop the weapons," Kieran ordered. "All of you, it's over." Carlyle laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Seems we're at an impasse, deputy. I've got 3 guns on your party. You've got 1 on me." "2," corrected a new voice, as Thomas Fletcher himself stepped from the trees to Kieran's right, rifle raised. "And another dozen men coming up behind us." Rebecca stared in shock at the man she recognized from the daguerreotype he had sent with his letters. Thomas Fletcher was taller than she had imagined, with graying hair at his temples and deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes. He was handsome in a weathered way, his bearing confident as he trained his weapon on Carlyle's men. Carlyle's eyes darted between Kieran and Fletcher, calculating his odds. For a tense moment, Rebecca was certain he would open fire, condemning them all to a bloody end. Then, surprisingly, he lowered his rifle slightly. "Might be I surrender," he said slowly. "Or might be I take Fletcher's bride with me. Even things up a bit." Before anyone could react, Carlyle lunged forward, grabbing Rebecca and yanking her against him, his rifle pressed to her temple. She gasped, fear paralyzing her as the cold metal dug into her skin. "Let her go, Carlyle." Kieran's voice was deadly quiet. "This is between you and Fletcher. She's innocent." "Nobody's innocent," Carlyle snarled. "My brother wasn't given a choice. Why should Fletcher's woman be any different?" Rebecca could feel Carlyle's ragged breathing against her hair, sense the desperation emanating from him. This was a man with nothing left to lose, the most dangerous kind. "Your brother killed a family of 4 for their horses," Fletcher spoke up, his voice steady. "He made his choice. Rebecca has done nothing to deserve your vengeance. She chose you," Carlyle spat. "That's enough." Rebecca felt rather than saw his finger tightening on the trigger. In that moment, a strange calm descended over her. If she was to die here in these mountains, she would not do so cowering in fear. "Mr. Carlyle," she said, her voice remarkably steady, I understand losing someone you love. It hollows you out, leaves you wondering if anything matters anymore. His grip on her loosened infinitesimally, surprise at her words momentarily distracting him. But this won't bring your brother back, she continued. It will only ensure more death, including yours. She felt his hesitation, the fractional relaxing of his arm around her throat. It was all the opening Kieran needed. His shot cracked through the clearing with deadly precision. Carlyle staggered backward, the bullet finding its mark in his shoulder, his gun arm. The rifle clattered to the ground as he fell, cursing. In the same instant, Fletcher and the deputies took aim at Carlyle's men, who wisely dropped their weapons rather than face certain death. Rebecca stumbled forward, her legs nearly giving way with relief. Kieran was there in an instant, catching her before she fell, his arm strong around her waist. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, his free hand gently tilting her face to examine her for injuries. "No," she assured him, though she trembled uncontrollably now that the immediate danger had passed. "I'm all right." Fletcher approached as the deputies secured Carlyle and his men with handcuffs. He studied Rebecca's face for a long moment, then looked at Kieran, something unreadable passing between the two men. "Miss Osborne," Fletcher greeted her formally, removing his hat. "Not exactly the meeting I had envisioned when I sent for you." Rebecca attempted a smile, still leaning heavily on Kieran for support. "Mr. Fletcher, I'm relieved to see you unharmed after the attack on your ranch." Fletcher's expression darkened. "The ranch can be rebuilt. The men I lost cannot be replaced so easily." His gaze shifted to where Carlyle sat bleeding against a tree, hatred burning in his eyes. "At least justice will finally be served." As promised, more men arrived, a combination of lawmen, soldiers, and Fletcher's ranch hands. They took charge of the prisoners, preparing to transport them back to Calico for trial. Rebecca watched the proceedings from a fallen log where Kieran had insisted she rest, bringing her water and checking regularly on her condition. Fletcher eventually made his way back to her side, looking somewhat uncomfortable as he noticed Kieran hovering nearby. "Deputy Farrell tells me you've been through quite an ordeal since arriving in our territory," Fletcher said, settling beside her on the log. "I must apologize for inadvertently placing you in such danger." "You couldn't have known Carlyle would target me," Rebecca replied graciously. "Perhaps not," Fletcher conceded, "but I should have considered the risks more carefully before sending for a bride." He glanced at Kieran, who had moved a discreet distance away but remained within eyesight. "It seems I owe the deputy a debt of gratitude for protecting you." "We all do," Rebecca agreed, her eyes following Kieran as he spoke with one of the soldiers. "He risked his life repeatedly for my safety." Fletcher studied her face thoughtfully. "Yes, I can see that." After a moment's hesitation, he continued, "Miss Osborne, our arrangement was made under very different circumstances than those we now find ourselves in." Rebecca turned to him, suddenly alert to a shift in his tone. "Mr. Fletcher." "My ranch lies in ashes," he said bluntly. "It will take months, perhaps a year, to rebuild properly. The living conditions would be primitive at best during that time, hardly suitable for a new bride." "I'm not afraid of hard work or simple accommodations," Rebecca assured him, though a part of her wondered at this apparent change of heart. Fletcher's weathered face softened slightly. "I don't doubt your fortitude, Miss Osborne. You've proven yourself remarkably courageous these past days." He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "But I'm 50 years old. Too old, perhaps, to ask a young woman to share in starting over from nothing." "Are you releasing me from our arrangement?" Rebecca asked, trying to understand exactly what he was proposing. "I'm giving you a choice," Fletcher clarified. "One you didn't have when you answered my advertisement. If you still wish to honor our agreement, I will welcome you as my wife and do everything in my power to make you comfortable despite our circumstances." He paused, glancing again toward Kieran. "But if you should find that your heart leads you elsewhere, I would understand." Rebecca followed his gaze to Kieran, warmth flooding her cheeks as she realized what Fletcher had observed, what perhaps had been obvious to everyone except herself. "Mr. Fletcher," she began carefully, "you're a good man. Your letters showed me that, under different circumstances. Under different circumstances, we might have made a suitable match," Fletcher finished for her, a hint of regret in his tone. "But circumstances have a way of revealing truths we might otherwise never discover." He patted her hand gently. "I've lived long enough to recognize when two people share something special, Miss Osborne. I've seen how Farrell looks at you and how you look at him." Rebecca couldn't deny it, though she had scarcely admitted it to herself. In the space of a few chaotic days, Kieran Farrell had come to mean more to her than she had thought possible. "What will you do?" she asked Fletcher, genuinely concerned for the man who had offered her a new life. He shrugged, a rueful smile touching his lips. "Rebuild, start over. It's the Western way." He rose from the log. "The stagecoach fare I sent you will remain yours, Miss Osborne. Consider it compensation for your troubles. It should be enough to get you back east if that's what you decide." "Thank you," Rebecca said softly, "for your understanding and your generosity." Fletcher nodded, replacing his hat. "I wish you happiness, Miss Osborne, whatever path you choose." As he walked away to join his men, Rebecca remained seated, her mind whirling with the sudden freedom thrust upon her. She could return to Boston, perhaps find better employment with the money Fletcher had provided. Or she could stay in the West, where danger and opportunity seemed to walk hand in hand. Her gaze sought out Kieran again, finding him deep in conversation with one of his deputies. As if sensing her eyes on him, he looked up, their gazes locking across the clearing. Something unspoken passed between them, a question, a possibility. By the time they began the journey back to Calico the next morning, Rebecca had made her decision. The town of Calico welcomed them as heroes. Word of Carlisle's capture had spread quickly, and citizens lined the main street to cheer as Kieran led the procession in, the prisoners securely bound in a wagon behind them. Rebecca rode beside him, acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. After delivering Carlisle and his men to the jail, Kieran escorted Rebecca back to Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. The older woman fussed over her, insisting on drawing a hot bath and providing fresh clothing. "The whole town's talking about you, dear, Mrs. Peterson informed her as she helped Rebecca unpack the few belongings that had survived her adventures. "How brave you were, facing down that Carlisle creature. And the way Deputy Farrell rode into Gunfire to bring you back alive. It's like something from a dime novel." Rebecca smiled at the woman's enthusiasm, though her own thoughts were preoccupied with the conversation she needed to have with Kieran. They had scarcely had a private moment since Fletcher's surprising offer of release from their arrangement. "Mrs. Peterson," she ventured, "would you happen to know when Deputy Farrell might be free? I need to speak with him about my plans." A knowing gleam entered the older woman's eyes. "He mentioned stopping by this evening once things at the jail were settled." She patted Rebecca's hand. "Fletcher's a fine man, but if you'll forgive my saying so, I always thought you and Kieran made a more natural pair." Rebecca blushed, but didn't deny the observation. "Nothing is settled yet," she cautioned. "I don't even know if Kieran feels—" "Oh, he feels plenty, Mrs. Peterson interrupted confidently. "Anyone with eyes can see that. The way that man looks at you speaks volumes." With these reassuring words echoing in her mind, Rebecca bathed and changed into a simple but pretty dress Mrs. Peterson had lent her green calico that complemented her chestnut hair and brought out the hazel in her eyes. As promised, Kieran arrived that evening after supper, looking freshly bathed himself, his hair still damp at the temples. Mrs. Peterson discreetly excused herself to visit a neighbor, leaving them alone in the small parlor. "You're looking well," Kieran observed, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. "The green suits you." "Thank you," Rebecca replied, suddenly nervous now that the moment for honesty had arrived. "Mrs. Peterson has been very kind. The whole town is talking about your courage," Kieran said, remaining standing near the doorway. "How you spoke to Carlyle, kept your composure even with a gun to your head." Rebecca shook her head. "I was terrified." "That's what makes it brave," Kieran pointed out, "doing what needs doing despite the fear." He hesitated, then added, "Fletcher told me about your conversation. That he released you from your agreement." Rebecca nodded, watching Kieran's expression carefully. "He did. So you'll be returning to Boston." His voice was carefully neutral. "I haven't decided," Rebecca replied honestly. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "That depends in part on you." Kieran's eyes widened slightly. "On me?" Rebecca moved closer to him, close enough to see the faint scar above his right eyebrow, the flecks of darker blue in his irises. "These past days have been terrifying, dangerous, and unlike anything I ever imagined when I agreed to become a mail-order bride." She smiled softly. "They've also shown me what it feels like to truly connect with someone, to be seen for who I am, not just what I represent." Kieran remained very still, but hope was dawning in his eyes. "Rebecca, I came west seeking security," she continued, finding courage in his expression. "A practical arrangement with a decent man, but I've found something I wasn't looking for, something I didn't know to want." "And what's that?" Kieran asked, his voice rougher than usual. Rebecca reached up, gently touching his face. "A man who makes me feel brave, who looks at me and sees not just a woman to protect, but a partner to respect." She smiled, her heart pounding. "If you want me to stay in Calico, Kieran Farrell, I will. Not as Fletcher's wife, but perhaps as yours, someday." For a moment, Kieran seemed frozen in disbelief. Then his hands came up to cradle her face with exquisite tenderness. "I've been falling in love with you since I pulled you from that overturned stagecoach," he confessed, his thumbs tracing gentle patterns on her cheeks. "But I never thought, never dared hope you might feel the same." "I do," Rebecca assured him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never felt this way about anyone." Kieran's smile was radiant. "Then stay in Calico. Let me court you properly the way a woman like you deserves." "I'd like that," Rebecca replied, her own smile matching his. "Very much." When Kieran lowered his head to kiss her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, as if all the chaos and danger had been leading to this moment of perfect clarity. His lips were gentle against hers, the kiss tender but filled with promise. When they finally parted, Kieran kept his arms around her waist, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "I should warn you," he said, only half joking. "Life with a deputy isn't always peaceful. There are risks." Rebecca laughed softly. "After outlaw attacks, gunfights, and kidnapping attempts, I think I can handle a few risks." She grew more serious. "As long as we face them together." "Together," Kieran agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. 5 years later, Rebecca stood on the porch of their home on the outskirts of Calico, watching as Kieran taught their 3-year-old son to ride his first pony. Little James Farrell, named for Kieran's father, clutched the saddle horn with determined concentration, his face a miniature version of his father's. "Not too fast," Rebecca called, automatically placing a protective hand over her swollen belly where their second child grew. Kieran grinned up at her, keeping a firm hand on the pony's bridle. "We're being careful, aren't we, Jamie?" The boy nodded vigorously. "I'm a cowboy, Mama, like Papa." "And a fine one you'll be," Rebecca agreed, her heart full as she observed her family. Life in Calico had flourished in the years since Carlisle's defeat. Thomas Fletcher had rebuilt his ranch and eventually married a widow from Sacramento with 2 children of her own. They maintained a cordial relationship with the Farrells, sometimes joining them for Sunday dinners after church. Kieran had continued as deputy until last year, when the aging sheriff had finally retired, and the townspeople had elected him to the position. The badge suited him, a symbol of the justice and protection he had always valued. Rebecca had found her own place in the community, first as a seamstress making curtains and dresses for the ladies of Calico, and later opening a small shop that had become a gathering place for women to exchange news and companionship while selecting fabrics and patterns. Their wedding had taken place 6 months after Rebecca's arrival in Calico, enough time for a proper courtship, though everyone in town had known from the start they were destined for each other. Mrs. Peterson had insisted on hosting the reception at her boarding house, declaring it only fitting since she had seen the love blooming right under her roof. Life wasn't always easy in the still wild territory. Droughts, harsh winters, and occasional outlaws tested their resilience. But Rebecca had never regretted her decision to stay. The security she had sought as a mail-order bride had come to her, after all, not through a practical arrangement, but through the love of a man who had ridden into Gunfire to bring her back alive. As Kieran lifted Jamie from the pony and set him on his shoulders, the boys' delighted laughter rang out across their property. Kieran carried him up the porch steps to where Rebecca waited, his free arm circling her waist as he drew her close. "Happy?" he asked, the question he still posed regularly, as if amazed by his good fortune. Rebecca leaned into his embrace, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she assured him. And as the setting sun painted the western sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Rebecca Osborne Farrell knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the most unexpected journeys led to exactly where you were meant to be all along.